Buenos días, estudiantes. Hoy vamos a hablar sobre eventos, sobre cómo hablar de eventos en el pasado. Es un tiempo nuevo que se llama el pretérito. Empezamos con algunas palabras que indican el pasado. Por ejemplo, ayer, que significa yesterday, o la palabra pasado. Pasado es un adjetivo, so podemos decir, por ejemplo, el sábado pasado o la semana pasada. Es adjetivo, así que hay concordancia. Como siempre, cuando conjugamos los verbos, usamos raíz más terminaciones. ¿Okay? Y también, como siempre, tenemos un grupo de terminaciones para los verbos que terminan en AR y otro grupo que terminan en ER y también IR. Ok, so empezamos con las terminaciones de, por ejemplo, hablar. So, si el verbo es, Si el verbo es hablar, la raíz es hable. Hable. So, hable más E con acento. Hazte es la forma de tú. Usted habló. Él habló. Ella habló. Nosotros, nosotras hablamos. Aquí tenemos poquito de problema porque en el presente también es hablamos. So, pasado, hablamos. Presente, hablamos. So, nada más tenemos que saber por el contexto si es pasado o presente en la forma de nosotros. Ustedes hablaron. Ellos y ellas hablaron. So, tenemos hazte o amos-aron. Vamos con los verbos de ER. So, por ejemplo, el verbo comer, raíz com. So, tenemos comí y con acento, iste. La forma de usted es yo, acento en la O. So, usted comió, él también, siempre tenemos igual aquí, comió. Nosotros comimos, ustedes comieron. Ellos y ellas también comieron. So, como siempre, tenemos igual usted, él, ella, ustedes, ellos, ellas. ¿Ok? También estas mismas terminaciones de ER, me falta la E aquí, perdón. Iste, yo, imos, oyeron. También vale igualmente para los verbos que terminan en IR. Por ejemplo, vivir. Raíz, viv. So, tenemos viví, viviste, vivió, vivió, vivimos, vivieron, vivieron. También con los verbos de IR es igual a los de AR y no sabemos vivimos, presente, vivimos, pretérito. So, tenemos que saber por el contexto. Ahora, quiero que practiques. So make a verb table for 3 verb tables. One for anunciar, un verbo de AR, aste o amos aron. One for aprender, verbo de ER, iste yo, imos yeron. And for descubrir, IR, iste yo, imos yeron. So pause, make your tables, and then come back and see your corrections. El verbo anunciar. Anuncié, anunciaste, anunció, anunció, anunciamos, anunciaron, anunciaron. This is not super normal. Verbs don't generally have a root that ends in a vowel, but it's okay. It happens. And it doesn't change at all how we conjugate the verb. So pause if you haven't done aprender yet and make sure to write that out so you can check your work. Aprender, aprendí, aprendiste, aprendió, aprendió, aprendimos, aprendieron, aprendieron. Y descubrir. Oops, I forgot the R on my root. Descubrí, descubriste, descubrió, descubrió, descubrimos, descubrieron, descubrieron. Just a reminder, if your verb is reflexive, just like when you're conjugating it in the present tense, your reflexive pronoun is going to change for the subject, and it's going to come before the conjugated verb. So, for example, if our verb were meterse, which is like to get into something, like to get into trouble, if you say, ooh, I got in trouble, you're going to conjugate your verb just like always, but you have to add in the reflexive pronouns too. So the se is going to change to me, and then meti is your preterite because it's an ER verb. For nosotros, nos metimos. For tú, your reflexive pronoun is te. Met is your root, and then metiste. And then from here on out, all of our pronouns are se. Se metió for usted. Se metieron for ustedes. Se metió for él and for ella, and se metieron also for ellos and ellas. I want to look a little bit about how some pronunciation issues with the letter se interact with our endings for the preterite verbs. So all of our verbs that end in car have the intent of making a hard k sound, right? Car is how you would say this in Spanish. Practicar, for example. Let me get my pen here. Practicar. So when we say the word in the infinitive, we have a k, hard k sound. So in Spanish, you know this already intuitively, but a ca and a co, like for example, casa or cosa, the c in these situations makes a hard k sound. None of you would say, hola, bienvenido a mi casa. You would say casa for sure. And that's the same sound we have here with practicar. However, CEs and actually CIs also, that same letter se has a soft S sound, right? So, for example, tengo celos, I'm jealous, or the CI, gracias. So the T has two different sounds. It's either a hard k sound or a soft s sound, depending on the letter that follows it. So if we look over to our preterite endings for a verb that ends in AR, we have a combination. We have what's going to end up being as our root, because our root ends in C here, we have practice. Oops, there we go. is our root right here. And that C is gonna butt up against all of these letters, okay? When we make our verb conjugations. Now, for the most part, it's fine. So we want to keep that hard k sound, right? We don't practicar. So we have practicaste, we have practicó, we have practicó, we have practicamos, we have practicaron. But here we do not have practic. Because if we remember that soft, the CE ends up with an S sound, okay? So here, it would sound like practice, and that's not what we want. So the problem is we need to get this to sound like practique, which is practicó, practicaste, to keep that hard k sound. So in order to do that, in Spanish, we know that a Q, U, E makes a hard k sound, right? Like for example, hola, ¿qué pasa? Right? You know that QU makes a hard sound. So only for the forma de yo, because that's the only place where we have the instead of the o sound there. When we're making preterite forms of verbs that end in car, the yo form, the C in your root, is going to turn into a QU. So let's practice that again, see what it looks like with the verb sacar. So again, we have our car here ending. So we have sacamos, no problem. Sacaron, otra vez, no hay problema. Sacaron, still not a problem. Saco, not a problem. We're going to repeat it. Saco, not a problem. Sacaste, not a problem. Sase, problema. So all we have to do is erase the C, turn it into a Q, U, and we have sake. That sounds just as hard k sound as all of our others. So we have sake, sacaste, sacó, sacamos, sacaron. So this isn't a real change in anything other than we need to make sure that the written word sounds the same as the spoken word. So any verb that ends in a car in the preterite yo form, you're going to change the C to a QU. We're going to look at the same issue, but showing up with verbs that end in gar. So in Spanish, ge has two different sounds, either a g or a h sound. When it's followed by an a or an o, for example, gato, gota, we have a g sound. When it's followed by an e or an e, it makes a soft h sound. So, por ejemplo, ángel. It's not ángel, it's ángel, okay? Or our vocab word, gel, not gel, it's gel. Okay, so when we have this verb, for example, llegar, we want that g sound because our infinitive and all of our normal stuff have the ga sound, which is this hard g sound. So the same thing is going to happen when we add our... So llegamos, llegaron, llegaron, llegó, llegó, llegaste, llegué. Okay, so llegué is our problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to erase the G, and we are going to instead put AGU, because ge does make the right sound. So GUE. So only on the yo form of verbs that end in GAR, the yo form, your G is going to turn into a GU. Only on the forma de yo. Our last set of verbs that have a change due to spelling are verbs that end in Z-A-R. And honestly, this isn't one we hear today. Over the years, Old Spanish used to distinguish and make a Z-E sound differently than they made a Z-A sound. Now, they all sound the same, both in the Latin American dialect and in the Spanish dialect. So in the Latin American dialect, we have sa, so, and se. There's no difference. And in the Spanish, the Castilian dialect, they have tha, tho, and the. No difference anyway. But it used to be different way back when Spanish was evolving. And because it was different then, they changed the spelling, and they just haven't changed it back. So the Z only on the yo form is going to get turned into a C. So only for the forma de yo on verbs that end in Z-A-R, the Z changes into a C. So our 3 changes of spelling due to pronunciation are, just to review, verbs that end in G-A-R, only in the yo form. The G turns into a GU. Verbs that end in C-A-R, only in the yo form of this preterite tense. The C changes into a QU. And verbs that end in Z-A-R, only in the yo form. The Z changes into a C. And this is all preterite.